I always start with the user journey or just getting into the shoes of the user or day in the life of, because if I understand them deeply, it's my best chance of designing a product that will actually service their needs. And if I'm not going to service their needs, they're not going to pay for it.
Welcome, builders, to How Would You Build It? The podcast that dives deep into the dynamic world of startups and product creation right here in South Africa and Africa. This show is more than just interviews. Every week, we sit down with the brilliant minds to provide a masterclass for building digital products amidst the challenges and opportunities unique to our continent. From seasoned founders to dynamic product managers, we uncover the unique stories and strategies behind some of the most innovative digital products being built. So for all the aspiring founders and product builders out there, you'll discover that each episode is a wealth of practical wisdom and local and actionable insights. Make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to our podcasts and connect with us on social media for even more content. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, builders, to another episode of How Would You Build It? I'm really excited. We've got Kim Whitaker, who is a serial entrepreneur by my research that I've done. She's focused in the travel industry, had a number of startups, and was doing some really cool projects during COVID. So Kim, welcome to the show. Excited to have a conversation. How are you doing?
How's it? Thanks for having me. Great to be here. As my grandmother would say, I'm too well.
I'm too well. That's good. You're fresh off the plane. We were just chatting about how you've traveled across. You've just completed an MBA. You're a very busy woman from what I've gathered, and that's the kind of people we like talking to on our show. So I'm really excited to hear your stories because we've got a mutual friend which we've touched on. Shout out Angela if you're watching. But you guys did some really cool stuff. But I think the story starts at Once. Do you just want to give us a very quick rundown on Once and how you exited that? Because that obviously isn't around anymore.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I think Once is the beginning of a story. Once upon a time, I was in Cape Town and I met the love of my life while I was hiking up Table Mountain. Or once I was in Cape Town, I was hanging out at this really cool place and I met my best friend around a campfire and we started chatting about our travels and we ended up spending 4 months together. And for me, the space of backpacking, hostels and hotels is all around that moment of like creating a memory before the memories happen, creating spaces that people can enjoy, and everything from the design of the height of the desks that people are looking into each other's eyes is such a beautiful opportunity for human connection, which I think is becoming even more valuable today. I mean, when we started in 2013, it was valuable, but I think in today's era of technology and social networks and what post-COVID is exactly. I think that one of the most fundamental assets that we're missing and that becomes increasingly valuable is connection. So Once was all about that. We had a property in Cape Town and another one in Johannesburg. We curated experiences around those locations and even to various music festivals around the continent. So it was all around experience and connection, really. So we started that 2013. Had an incredible team, and then obviously sort of hitting the 2020 year was quite different and challenging. But I'll pause there for a moment.
Okay, cool. Yes, because there is a story, and I actually recall because I was living in Frederick when the fateful 2020 year turned around to us. And I remember you actually being in the news, and I only connected the dots when I watched another podcast of yours that you were on, where you explained your story of actually contracting COVID and then schools having to close because I was very close to where that was. So everyone was talking about it. And then I connected the dots that it was you because you were one of the first people. So apparently that changed your trajectory and where you started your next journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was on a trip to Berlin. I was due to speak at a really cool conference called the Berlin Travel Festival. And I was attending ITB, which is like a really well-known kind of travel festival. And the moment I landed, the organizer were like, sorry, Kim, the event's off. COVID has sprung up, we just cannot host it. So being like super industrious, and like I'm not flying all the way to Germany just to turn around. So we organized like fringe events. We like carried on with all the like influencer meetings and meetups, and then I was like, this COVID thing, won't stop me. I went on a girls' trip. We'd planned the skiing trip for ages with me and a girlfriend. So we went on that, very close to Italy. Like Southern Austria is jolly close to Italy. And all I can say is by the time like it was a 2 or 3 day trip, by the time it was over, we were rushing out of there. Like suddenly it had escalated. And coming back to Cape Town, I went to go fetch my kids from school, and they said, oh no, gosh, you can't come in here. You've been overseas. And I was like, oh, that's rubbish. Like, I'm perfectly healthy. I'll go get a COVID test just to prove you wrong. Like, found a COVID test. There was like a guy at one of the private hospitals just setting up. So I like went in there. I must have been one of the first. He wasn't even wearing gloves when he did my COVID. He wasn't even wearing a mask. And just like shoved this thing up my nose. And long story short, like 2 days later, I get this phone call at 9 p.m. Your COVID test positive. You're number 42 in South Africa. So
boom.
That like unraveled a series of events. One of which is that the kids' school closed down, along with like multiple other schools. And the upside was that I had a few weeks ahead of everyone else to think. And I mean, I was like in isolation thinking, now what am I going to do about this hotel business? What am I going to do? We also have a non-profit called Khwela, which works with young women in tourism. What's that going to happen? Like, what's going to happen there? And yeah, and so it was on a call. I'm very connected to the entrepreneurial network in a group called EO, or Entrepreneurs Organization. We set up a call with some entrepreneurs in Italy. One of them was like, oh, it's crazy here. People are dying left, right, and center. And someone asked, what would you have done 2 weeks ago? And he said, I would have kept the hotels open, because the healthcare workers are like sleeping in their cars and they have got nowhere to go, and all the hotels are boarded up. I was like, there's an idea. Like, we have 300 beds. I'm sure we could like do something. And that idea evolved over the week. And because of being number 42, I'd been asked to be on a lot of like radio shows. Can you share what it feels like? And so I was like, fine, okay. Like, it feels, my chest's kind of tight. It wasn't, people were just curious, I think, of what are the actual symptoms feel like. Exactly. And I didn't know anyone who had COVID at all. Like, I knew no one. And so, yeah, it was like a Saturday afternoon. I was cleaning my kitchen, listening to Lance Morissette, like doing the whole lockdown cleaning vibe. And I was like, oh, a platform would solve this problem. There are more and more hotels that are like freaking out because they don't have, there's no foreseeable revenue. And there must be thousands of healthcare workers who are needing to go to work, but they actually don't want to go to work because, if I was a healthcare worker in South African context, exactly, you don't want to bring it home. And many South African healthcare workers live in multi-family homes. So they might have elderly parents. So anyway, the idea was like, platform business, that would solve that problem. So I called up a mate in Joburg. It's like, hey, I met you at an event once and you've got a really great marketing agency. Could you build me a website by Monday morning? I've got an interview with 702 in Cape Talk. And he was like, sure. My team's keen. Like, everyone's freaking out. We need something positive to do. So literally in under 48 hours, they built a website. The brand was called Ubuntu Beds because it's all about, the feeling of Ubuntu. And we're like literally solving this problem of beds. And did the interview, and I was like so confident. Yeah, we've built this platform, and we've got, if you're a hotel, you can list here. If you are a healthcare worker, you can list here. And it's literally a Google form. It's literally like we created a button with like a Google form and another Google form, and that was it. Like, it was nothing more than that. It was like so simple.
Hashtag no code.
Yeah, it was so simple. And then maybe half an hour or a few hours after that interview, I got a phone call like, hi, it's Jefferson from R&B, and we'd love to like sponsor your program. We need to be like finding healthcare workers accommodation, and so this fits in perfectly with our mandate. I had people calling me like, I want to help. I'm an accountant. How can I help? I'm a reservations agent. How can I help? I'm a coder. How can I help? And within 9 days, we had our first healthcare worker placed. We had a team of 47 people. We were like designing and iterating and evolving every single day. And within a few weeks, I mean, the system became a lot more refined. And we were able to geolocate. We had some great partners coming in with the tech in the back end. We were able to sort of spatially locate all the hospitals, public, private, different private brands, and then map them against the accommodation. We had 1,800 hotels, backpackers, Airbnbs offering the accommodation. So someone would call us like in the middle of the Eastern Cape, like, hi, I'm in Lusiki. I've just had COVID and I can't go home. And we'd be like, okay, give us a second, look up Lusiki, and then it would pop up with all the different options close by. And we'd then be able to like get them going. Yeah, it was a super fun project. And in the end, we accommodated about 4,000 healthcare workers, which was over our moonshot goal of 2,500. And super fun team, and just like building products and iterating and trying and testing, and it was scrappy, but so fun.
And it's just amazing. Like, obviously, what an interesting time, right? But it played into your hands, and I'm sure you learned a lot of lessons around that. So we spoke offline that you've just completed your MBA, and in it there's design thinking, and I wanted to just tap into that because that's my jam. I love learning as much as I can about that. So I want to know, like, great, love it. You started with a Google form, and then you started building a team, and you started getting all this investment, and you started like realizing, okay, we're going to actually build a platform here. How did you guys sort of use design thinking? How did you start prioritizing what needed to be done? And obviously time like was of the essence, right? Because people were needing this. It was urgent. There was I can only imagine the climate that you were doing all of this in. So how did you guys navigate? How did you navigate that? How did you know what to prioritize, and what was your framework there?
Okay, so I actually finished my MBA in 2020. So I handed in my final dissertation like in February.
Wow. Talk about
and
timing.
so I had, yeah, I know. Officially I'll say December, but I had some edits to do. Yeah, like, so basically February I handed in the final thing, and what that was basically like loads of interviews, data transcribed, decoded, and then I had a kernel theory. I had a hunch, or a kernel theory, that my thesis was around how young women could use tourism as a career advancement tool. And my thesis was that if we could get young unemployed women to travel, we could get them into tourism. And if we could get them into tourism, we could grow their career into other avenues.
I like that hypothesis. I like that.
Yeah, so it was all about
give
we
them
actually
a
took
taste.
women on. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of a delay, but give them a taste, because that's what I love about traveling, right? Just if we take a step back away from the tech and the business, the beautiful thing of traveling is you don't understand it until you do it. Like, once you've done some traveling, you actually, that sparks that, this is really cool. Oh, wow, look at that. I've learned a new culture, a new language, a new this, and it sparks. It is. I think a lot of people that get into travel is because they traveled and enjoyed it so much. So I love that. That's a great,
100%.
yeah.
So what I learned through my own journey in travel, and what I recognized in other people, is that when we travel, and I'm not talking about like a business holiday, I'm talking about, or like a workation, I'm talking about like a genuine travel, and preferably backpacking where there's some sort of risk involved. Like when we take a risk and we take a step into an unknown world, it's kind of like Joseph Campbell's 11 steps of the hero's journey. And that is that when we cross that threshold into an unknown world, we start taking risks. We find an unlikely ally, which might be a new made friend, it might be a receptionist at a hotel, or whatever. And as we process those risks, the car breaks down, the train's late, the hotel is over, like whatever those things are, we build resilience and grit by being able to overcome it and still be okay. And because we have to overcome it, because it's like, no, can't go home. And so how do we take those that resistance, that resilience and grit, how do we take that into the workplace and go, oh, okay, this is scary, this person's shouting at me. I've been here before. When I was bungee jumping, I also felt terrified. But actually, I overcame that and I just stayed quiet. I breathed and then I just committed. And so, can we take those things that we learn when we travel and apply them in a work environment? So, anyway, that was my thesis. And so I had been. I only realized like recently that I'd been in such a abstract world of like this theory, and then hunting around in the world to see whether this theory actually, was valid at all. And so data collection and being super curious about the end user, in this case, the unemployed woman, became like my absolute focus, right? Like stepping in their shoes, like understanding the day in the life of, like understanding their thought process, understanding everything, and then doing user interviews and then building out a theory from there. So when COVID hit, it was like, boom, straight into the mind of a healthcare worker. Okay, let's start chatting to some healthcare workers. Within days, we set up a WhatsApp line. And so we could gauge a lot of information from healthcare workers. We had a telephone line that they could call. We could very quickly learn like what was their reality in that moment and how do we solve for it. Little things like, okay, cool. You're going into isolation now for 2 weeks in a hotel. Okay, but like, what do you eat? Because you can't, the hotel kitchen's closed. And there's no, and so like
I'll go to Woolies.
Little things, you can't go to Woolies. Like it's all, there's so many layers of it and so much complexity, but it all comes down to like, if we understand how the healthcare worker is feeling, they're anxious, they don't want to go to work, but we need them to go to work. How do we meet those desires, fears through this product that we're building? So it was extremely iterative. I mean, we had a daily huddle like every day, I think, for at least the first 3 months, where new information was coming in and we were able to refine as we went along. So we started learning, okay, over time, when that first wave was kind of coming down a little bit, we realized, okay, some healthcare workers are more urgent than others. And then we started being able to segment our product. Okay, some are actually needing isolation because they have COVID and they're COVID positive. Others are needing a long-term solution in order to stay at work. So then we segmented our product and created like a slightly different kind of offering, where the one was 2 weeks isolation, meals included, regular tests, etc., hygiene protocols to a certain level. The other product was more like, okay, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks in a location. And as it was interesting, as different cities were surging, the healthcare workers were getting shipped up. So you'd be like, there's 700 arriving tomorrow. And we'd be like, okay, let's get going. Okay, cool, guys. We need to like
so
hustle,
mad. Like you guys put the agile in agile. You'd had to have been like been super agile. And yeah, wow, that is, I'm trying to put my shoes, my feet in your shoes during this time, and it must have been chaos.
It was, but I must say, like, our team was so disciplined. I learned so much from the people around me. It was unreal. Just in terms of like, okay, so as I mentioned, we started quite scrappy. We used Airtable as our database, and everything went through Airtable. So we eventually ended up allocating like a rating system to the healthcare worker based on the application form that they sent. Like, are you a frontline worker?
That's quite granular.
And then they would get prioritized according to their star rating, like in order of their priority. Just the, how that fed into the accounting system, and then, was the way that was all set up. I had an incredible team who was exceptionally, had the capacity to be analytical, and then balance that with creativity. And I think that is the essence of like great design thinking, is when you can have the discipline of data and boundaries and rules and process, and then
Okay.
also like the creativity, because if it's
Mm.
all analytical, you end up looking at an Excel spreadsheet and
Mm-hmm.
getting quite bored. If it's all creative, it's like, it can be quite overwhelming, and there can be so much information that you don't really know how to sift through, and then it's like an overwhelm. Whereas I think that
Mm.
balance of having a team that's both like creative and pushes the limit, but then analytical and structured,
Yeah,
it was
it's a good
super
point.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because the creative space is generally like the fun space. Everyone wants to be in there, but you need, so just going to like a Scrum methodology, we put time boxes. And you need that, right? You don't want to just go off on tangents. Someone asked me the other day is how do you know when an experiment is done, right? Because everyone wants to just kind of experiment on an experiment on an experiment. And like, how do we know when this experiment is done? I was like, that's a really good question. And that's why we time box and say, okay, cool. At this point, let's see the results. Let's see how we're doing. So let's bring that analytical, stop being creative. Let's look at the results and iterate on it. And I assume that was kind of the process that you went on.
Well,
I love
Angela,
what
I'll
you,
say, was Angela, our mutual
yeah.
friend, was one of those like, Scrum masters who was just like incredibly, just like so graceful, but also held the space really well. Like give
Mm,
people space, but there's a boundary, and
mm,
you just, done is better than perfect. We'll regroup in 5 days' time,
yeah,
and by then we're gonna have stitched something together. It's incredibly powerful and hard to
mm,
hold that space.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, from the design thinking point of view, I want to double down on. You said you put yourself in the shoes of the user, the healthcare worker. Can you just tell me why that's so important? We can talk about it with Ubuntu Beds, but why should any founder or any UX researcher, product manager, you name it, why is that such an important element in the design thinking framework?
I mean, I can give you an analogy that best summarizes this feeling. And that is that you go on a date with someone. Scenario one, they're like, me, 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 me. And this is all my hobbies. And this is what I do. And I'm amazing. And like, these are my accolades. And me, 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 me. And you're like, uh-huh,
Mm,
uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. And the second date version is like, you sit down at the date and they're like, oh, so tell me, what are you interested in? What are your hobbies?
yeah,
What inspires you? And they're
yeah.
like nod and they're interested and they're like, wow. So which date, like which version do you want to go on a second date with?
Someone that has a bit
Like
of interest in yeah, in me or
exactly.
the thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing
Yeah.
is
And
that I
so many.
think too many brands just go, I'm amazing. This is my product offering,
Mm,
and we do this and we do that. And so even when I look at their website, like in the first instance, are they telling me what they can do and like, oh, look how amazing I am?
mm,
Or are they telling me, I hear you, I get you. This is how we can help solve your problem. Because that's the one I'm going to be purchasing in the end of the day. Like I want to
mm,
spend more time, I'm going to be more engaged. Um, you know, are they interested in me, or are they just interested in like saying how amazing they are? Because
yeah.
and as an analogy to why design thinking should, I always start with the user journey, or just getting into the shoes of the user, or day in the life of, because
Hmm.
if I understand them deeply, it's my best chance of designing a product that will actually service their needs. And if I'm not going to service their needs, they're not going to pay for it.
Yeah.
so so then like, then what's the point? If people aren't going
Mm,
to buy the product or service, then there really isn't, like, maybe there's just,
yeah.
why are we doing this thing?
Yeah. No, listen, it's a theme that comes up on the podcast often. We like to talk about it. It's like people run off to do the tech. I think the whole analogy, build it and they will come, right? And it's like what we can do, what the tech can do, but it's actually what problem do you need to solve? It's like let's take a step back and understand the user and the problem that they have. And it seems so straightforward, but it's amazing how people don't do it. Like they don't think like that. It's crazy. Um, So Kim, how did you guys collect all the data? Because it's all one fair enough to say, okay, we're going to do all this research, we're going to do have all these conversations with healthcare workers or our users or customers. How did you guys actually collect the data and synthesize it to kind of give you that direction? Where, because that I think is a bit of a missing part as well. You know, it's easy to say I spoke to some customers, but how do you bring it all together and find the trends?
I mean, I still do this in any organization I'm working with. I set up a Google form for myself and I write down like the key questions that I'm interested in. And then as I'm chatting to them, I will answer those questions. And then I've got this sort of spreadsheet in the background that's getting like richer and richer with more information. And I mean, now we have things like ChatGPT, which is, we didn't really have 4 years ago to this extent.
Mm,
So now it's easy. Now I can build a bot and be like, which themes are we seeing here? Like what's emerging? Like what, make me a word cloud of like, of things that are coming up.
yeah, wow, that's a
So
good idea. Totally doing that.
yeah, so there's like so much you can do just from her being I don't know, I find it extremely useful to be like thorough in my interview approach. And some of it can be qualitative. So that's where I'm trying to capture like word for word what someone's saying. I use things like Otter AI and other technology to actually
Mm,
capture actual words, because I think that the actual words that users use are extremely important and
mhm,
conveys meaning in a way that's will make a big difference in a large language model. Um, and then there's also the kind of meta cognition stuff, like what am I seeing that they're maybe not saying, like reading between the lines, what's frustrating them,
mm,
what's the zeitgeist, like what's the status quo, and then just pulling that all together into a way that the rest of the team can understand. Because
mm.
yeah, that can be, I mean, I'm working on a project right now. I think I'm on 600 or 700 lines of data, of qualitative information,
Wow.
which then needs to be coded into like one simple slide that makes it easy to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, because people go like,
Yeah.
and you spent 3 weeks on this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, yeah.
But it's important because I would never have thought of, I mean, like how you segregated, needing to think about they needed to eat. You had this version of a healthcare worker. You had this version of a accommodation that you needed, and you wouldn't understand that those were the struggles they had. The 700 people that had to fly up to Joburg for whatever it is. I'm not sure of the example you gave earlier, but having to
Mm,
understand all of that and what does that mean, and then building something to kind of facilitate and scale the solution, right? You
yeah,
needed those
totally,
insights.
totally. And I think
So yeah.
in the South African context, like there's so, I mean, think of, I'm sure people mention like checkers 60/60 all the time, but there's like little things, there are little things that app has done that really like speaks to my human need and my human
Mm,
desire, right? And it's so smart. I'm really looking forward to seeing how new and evolving brands are starting to look at traditionally underserved markets in South Africa. Like, how
mm,
do we deliver medicine in rural Mpumalanga?
hmm.
And how do we make, every South African from different walks of life the center of the user journey and design products around them? It's like, imagine how much more bang for buck we could get from government if we could actually do that and understand things like healthcare intimately. And,
Tim, I want to
you
do my
know,
thesis on that. And so this is why I love this conversation, because for the life of me, it seems like it's straightforward. Talk to your customers, talk to your users, get to understand, get inspiration, do your data, do your qualitative and your quantitative, but no one's doing it. And I just wonder that if more companies, more startups, more founders actually just started doing these basics that we consider as obvious, if they started doing it, what would the knock-on effect be on the economy? I don't know where my thesis would start. I don't know where I'd start with it, but I would love to understand what the multiplier effect would be if we started showing founders how to actually go and do the work in the background first and during and iterate. It seems straightforward, but why is it not happening? Why does it seem to be such a foreign concept? Freaks me out.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, from a philosophical point of view, or if I use a philosophical lens first, I think that governments in general need to be values aligned. And when they are values aligned, as in I am voted in or I am stepping up in leadership because I want to make my community better, I want to make my country better, there's a values alignment. If that role is sought after because it's well paid, it's a position of influence, it's you get access to all kinds of perks, like they're never going to use user-centric design because it's like too much effort, because they actually in general might not even care what the end user thinks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that we've not had load shedding for 6 weeks running up to elections is a pretty good indication. Like, oh, well, if you wanted to make people happy, maybe solve load shedding like the whole year round, not
Yeah.
just leading up to election.
Don't jinx it.
But no, sorry. But that being said, I do think that there are countries like Finland who in the 70s were ranked somewhere in the like high 200s of the worst education in the world and high maternal death rate, to now being industry leaders and like very progressive, like birthing and maternal success rates. And I think that that is because the leadership became aligned to the needs of the people, and they realized, okay, we need to actually understand, like, how do schools work, how do systems work, how does rural schooling work, and I've understood that there are principles that need to be built on. Same with the birthing practices or maternal death rate or success. You have to understand, like, what is the problem and what is the individual going through in order to build systems and systemic support to support those. So I think, first of all, philosophically, like, values alignment has to be there. I would say that design thinking, it takes a lot of effort, but the iterative process isn't necessarily expensive upfront, which is, again, not conducive if you're relying on corruption, right? Because every time that there is a big ticket number, we're going to spend 2 million on this, one little website, or we're going to spend 25 million on this one event or whatever. Like, it's the big ticket items. It's like a hit or miss. Whereas the design thinking process is iterative. And so it might be a little bit, you'd have to reimagine budgets. You'd have to reimagine spending. I don't know in which way, but I think it would be a lot more iterative, which would probably be better for the fiscal balance of any country. And I'm sure that there are examples of countries that have used it. But yeah, I think from a day-to-day like entrepreneur way, like I think the impact would be massive, because product market fit and just creating the services and products and that actually suit your customers is so rewarding. I'm sure you've had that. You're like, you try something, it doesn't work. You try something, it doesn't work. And then suddenly it works. And people are like, we love what you're doing. And you're constantly getting this positive feedback. Oh my gosh, my experience was amazing. And it makes you feel great as an entrepreneur. But like, for the business, it's great. You can employ more people. You can put more into the economy. So I think finally on a sort of on the ground level, I think that the reward would be tremendous.
No, absolutely. And create more jobs, etc., which is an interesting topic I wanted to kind of close in on. Although I could probably chat for a lot longer. Let's see how it goes. But anyway, so you did Khwela Woman, and that was to help we've already mentioned it, helping young ladies get into travel, right? So by the time this episode goes out, we'll be having Youth Day, actually, which is a public holiday around the corner. So just can you tell me how you utilize these kind of philosophies in building Khwela Woman and what it was trying to achieve, and how did that project go?
Yeah, so Khwela was born. So Khwela means to climb in isiXhosa, and it is this idea that climbing, climbing, whether it's the corporate ladder or whatever, like it takes a lot of effort. But if you, for example, climbing a mountain, it's quite rewarding as well. It can be quite fun. And the idea came about, I mean, there was a competition. I got a newsletter. I was about to go on holiday. I got this newsletter. It was like, are you a travel change maker? Apply here. And I was like, oh, yes, I've got this crazy idea.
Me?
Boom, boom, boom. And I just like literally I called my husband. I was like, babe, I'm working late tonight. Sorry. And then like we threw together, we like made a website that day, like just quickly put together something.
Seems to be a thread.
Seems to be a thread, but
I love it. It's great.
Preceding it was many months of thinking about this issue. And the issue was like I'd go to an event and founders would be like, oh, I am so frustrated. My staff, it's such a it's such a disappointment. And I can never find staff. And then at another event I went to, it was like there's 67% youth unemployment in South Africa. And I actually haven't seen that number moving. It's still, every time I look, it's still 67.
No,
that was years ago. So it's either just they're like either it's I don't know what the 67 number is, but anyway, at the time it was 67. Working. It stopped working. The clock stopped. And I was like, how can we have so much unemployment and yet people so dissatisfied with the quality of staff that they're having? Like there is an obvious disconnect here. And if we could bridge that gap, 100%. We would have happy employers and like a much happier workforce. So I just started realizing through my own teams, we had at once, so once had been going for like 6 years by that stage, and we had implemented some incentives programs for our team. So for example, if you'd been there for 2 years, you could apply to go on a swap. So you'd go work at a hostel in Europe or in Namibia or in wherever in the world if you wanted to go there. So we every year we sent 1 or 2 people and they would go and do these like hostel swaps, and they would go and work in a different country and live and experience. And whenever they came back, they lasted like a year. They were amazing when they came back, and then they usually went on and started their own business. And I was like, this is pretty cool. Like if we could do this for every person in our organization, like we would have some great upward trajectory. Everyone would end up in a great place. And also when they left, they gave me like 5 of their friends' CVs, and they're like, I'm so sorry I'm leaving, but I've told all my friends it's a cool place to work. So from our point of view, it was great. We always had like high quality applicants. Our staff were happy. Like they were going on to do better things. I was like, this is a pretty great business model. Also keeps costs low because you haven't got the same person in the same role for like 5 years and increasing them by CPIX every year. So it stabilizes the business financials. And I thought, okay, well, like maybe this could be like a university. Maybe this could be an actual way of getting people to cross that jump, to go from being unemployed to being like a real asset. That was kind of the thinking behind it. And yeah, we built out a program which included 2 months of soft skills, 3 weeks of an actual road trip around South Africa, and then a 6-month internship in a tourism business. And I think we trained 50 women over 2 years, and 80% ended up in full-time employment. Many of them are still employed. Like many of them ended up kind of getting promotions. And so that was our thesis. It was funded by Booking.com 2 years in a row. In fact, 3 years in a row, they funded the program. And during COVID... Was it a non-profit? It was a nonprofit, yeah, it was a nonprofit.
Okay.
Yeah. So it worked together with Once. They worked hand in hand. And then when I sold Once, Khwela continued, but it didn't have the same momentum as we had before. I think personally, I had I had exited once and I was ready to embrace something new. I didn't know
Mm.
yet what that was. But the experience of Ubuntu Bed, the experience of like fully embracing design thinking showed me a new way of working that wasn't 100% conducive in hospitality. So I
Yeah.
was interested in
Imagine.
leaning into tech. I was interested in leaning into that space. So Khwela sort of we put it on pause just after I exited once. But yeah, it was a great program. It was really
Mm.
cool while it worked. And during COVID, we actually pivoted to a WhatsApp bot. So we would host women's circles on WhatsApp. I think we hosted about 800
Amazing.
women's circles, um, which was rad because we were able to offer support during that tough time and still keep that
Yeah.
community feeling going. But obviously,
Mm.
travel was out.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's quite an interesting journey, and I love how tech, the mindset of tech. This is also something I like to think about. Is like, product has taught us these principles of iteration and design thinking, being empathetic to your users, etc., 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 and how it actually impacts how you approach a lot of the stuff in your life. Not just business, but in general. Like my wife hates me for it, but she's got into product now as well, so she gets it. She's like, we should do this for the garden. I'm like, let's take it step by step. Let's iterate our garden. But anyways, I love how it has an effect on you and how you can use it in business, right? But I want to know what are you doing now? Like, so what's the new projects? I know you kind of diving into tech now because if you read your LinkedIn properly, you've done an AI course. Can you so what's next? Where are you going with all of this?
Yeah, so after I sold the business, we went on a sabbatical for a few months in Canada with that was like the big now
Breathe.
what? The breathe and just connect and be one with the little people in my life. And then I took a job at Airbnb. So I worked for 18 months at Airbnb, which was super interesting, working on the Entrepreneurship Academy. And again,
Amazing.
there, like working with incredible, like nimble and very effective Airbnb team on falling in love with the Airbnb Academy user, who is someone in South Africa who's in a rural area or maybe a township and interested in leveraging Airbnb in order to make an additional income. So we kind of I worked on that program. It was super, super interesting. Really enjoyed it. And now I'm building a new business, and I'm currently in the sort of research phase and in the discovery
Expect a
phase.
website
And
tomorrow.
no, this one, no,
I'm joking.
no, this one I've had to be, so I think I have the benefit now of having time and a little bit of space and
Mm.
and that was what exiting my business afforded me. It was just like a little bit of breathing room to like breathe. And I think I keep saying to myself, like, this is day one. How do I want to start it? And so I've been a lot more critical. Like, I'm no longer prepared to work 16 or 18 hours a day. Like, I have little people
Mm.
who need me. And so I'm quite selective now. And I was quite adamant to build a business that is completely aligned with me, like my personal goals and values. So the discovery that I'm doing now is around working with post-exit entrepreneurs. And
Ooh, me
yeah,
likey.
so watch the space. But I'm busy in the discovery phase and I'm just having such a ball, like interviewing people and learning more about their personal journey, because what I've learned is, and I learned because I went through it myself, is that everyone, like, the exit is this elusive, amazing place that, like, you make your exit, whether you get the money or not. And then there's a vacuum. And for a lot of post-exit founders, the other side is quite is quite daunting, and
Mm.
can be unexpectedly lonely. And there are a whole
Okay.
lot of
Wow.
there are a whole lot of different themes that are emerging out of that. So that's what I'm curious about at the moment, and I'm really having
Love
fun.
it.
And in a few months, we'll know exactly where I end up. Yeah.
Think we're gonna have to set up another date for another conversation. I want to see. I'm really curious to see where this goes because we talk a lot about exits on this podcast. So it's that holy grail that founders are looking for. It's almost like that's what they want to do, right? They want to exit and be all rich and go on holiday living on an island or something. But it doesn't sound like it's that case, which is quite interesting. I'd like to dive into. But to finish off, I think I've stolen enough of your time. But we finish every episode with the lightning round. So I'm going to ask you four very quick questions. You think of the first answer that comes to your mind and then share it. All right. You ready?
Cool.
So the first one is easy. What book would you most recommend our listeners to read?
The Choice. And that is top of mind. I read it this weekend, but it is absolutely amazing. It's by Dr. Edith Agar, and she is a Holocaust survivor, but it's just such a brilliant reminder that we need to take risk. Like, a life without risk is just not worth living. And when we take risks, we need to be aware that there are always multiple options, and therefore we are completely empowered by making a particular choice. Because I think too often people, I look around me in the world and people have got these like forlorn, hopeless eyes because they just maybe are not aware of all the options that exist in the world. And then once we know how many options exist, we realize like, wow, I'm empowered with choice. So my top recommendation as of
Love
this
that.
very moment is The Choice. Yeah.
I like that. I love that. I'd like to give it to some family members. Um, uh,
We need to
so
have another call about
what's
this.
the best advice? Yeah. What's the best advice you have received as a founder that you've used and you feel needs to be passed on to the next founder?
So I've always sought mentors, and I've always sought mentors who are extremely different to me, like much older, different gender, preferably like from a different background. And I had a mentor once, right at the beginning of my business career, and he said to me, you need to take risks, but you need to make sure before you take the risk that if it fails, you might end up like hurt. You might end up like with grazed knees, and you might need to like, pick yourself up and start again. You might even, lose something meaningful, but you must never be paralyzed. Like, ensure before you commit to something that the worst case scenario you can live with. Like, do not put your, like, this is a personal choice, but do not put your house as a security for a business that for a business, full stop. If that's your, don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. So that has been something that I have considered absolutely every time I go into any kind of deal. I'll be 100% comfortable with the worst case scenario. And if I'm not comfortable, I just walk away. There'll be more.
I like that. Yeah, exactly, right? I like that a lot. Cool. Next one. What habit do you have that has contributed to your success or well-being? So I read Atomic Habits, for example. So like what habit have you taken on that you can contribute to success or a well-being?
When I was writing when I was doing my MBA, I had to get comfortable with reading, and I was not a very good reader. I wasn't a very fast reader. I didn't really read. And so someone said to me, just wake up at 5 a.m. every morning and read for an hour. And I was like, it's cold. I don't know. And then I started, and it's the best thing that has ever, ever happened. I read a lot. I read loads now. I wake up at 5 a.m. Because I wake up at 5 a.m., I go to bed early, which means I don't drink. So I've stopped drinking years ago. Like, waking up at 5 a.m. and reading has changed my health. It's changed my mindset, everything.
So I do the exact same, Kim. I literally wake up and make a cup of coffee and read my book. Sometimes I read one page, sometimes I read five. It depends on what, because it inspires me, right? Like while I'm reading, it's like a trigger. Like, cool, I'm finished reading. I
Mm.
need to go do that thing that it triggered. But yeah, I've started reading. I love that habit. I really, really do. That's done wonders for me as well. Also, I was never a reader. And somehow over the last couple of years, when I started this habit, I now read books. It's a great one, and I've learned a lot along the way. So awesome. Last one. Last one. So you obviously love travel, you love helping unemployment and sort of impact things. So if you could solve one more global problem with a business, what would it be?
One more global problem. Wow, global is so hard. I think it would
Okay,
be
let's bring it back
something
home, maybe.
around. No, no, I can think of one. I think it would be something around loneliness. I think that that is an underrated like epidemic or pandemic that's happening in the world. Another habit, by the way, that was very recent but extremely profound is that one of my forum members put a passcode on my phone. So at 6 p.m. my phone switches off and it only switches back
Mm,
on at 8 a.m. I cannot
sure.
tell you
Like,
how that has had an impact on my anxiety and stress and feeling of worthlessness and intruders. Like every single like thing that could ever come up in my mind is almost gone just because my
wow.
device is off. So if I had to start a business, it would be around like educating and really tackling this kind of symptom of loneliness that I think is, I mean, like
Mm,
child suicide rates in the world are up,
mm,
like it's just unhealthy. And I think that that would be
mm,
a meaningful way to make a lot of change.
I love that. I resonate with that as well. I think a lot about the youth of today and the different way they've been brought up with devices. If I think back to being a child and how I spent my days versus what I'm witnessing now. So I resonate with that. It does give me a bit of a twitch, but some people have said lean into it. I'm like, okay, sure, but yeah, I don't know. I like that. I like that a lot, Kim. All right. Kim, thank you so much for joining. I loved our conversation. It's so great to talk about design thinking and hear your awesome stories and the stuff that you've done. What's crazy to think is 2020 was 4 years ago already. Hey, that's just mind blowing on its own. But yeah,
Right.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And
Cool.
yeah, we'll see you
Cool.
soon.